not a whole lot of changes within the buyer's agency agreement. Nothing has changed on the first page here, as you can see. There's a lot of yellow here, and basically the only difference that you could see is they've taken the fees and everything that were used to be up in this general area at first, and they've taken them and put them down here because, as you know, we don't hardly ever see this used. Biggest change is right up here. They've taken it, they moved it up. It used to be C and D, and now it's A for brokerage fee, option 1 and option 2, and then you got B other. So, but other than that, that's really the only changes. Other than right here, they've added this surveillance here. So buyers advise that properties they enter may have both audio and video surveillance. We've talked about this multiple times in our sales meeting. Broker advises buyer to be aware of possible surveillance of any and all communications about potential property off-site. So I'm just going to go a step further. I'm going to say, whenever you're showing property, always tell your buyers, hey, try to limit your conversation within the houses because you never know where cameras or audio equipment is going to be set up. Again, just make sure your buyers are aware that there's audio and video equipment in there. And if you want to talk about something, we're talking about seeing religious stuff, or because, you know, that one company that the buyer talked about religious stuff, and so did the agent, then they got smacked on social media for being, you know, anti-religious and stuff like that. So it went crazy. So just be cognizant of recording and surveillance stuff in there. So other than that, that is the only changes within the buyer's agency agreement that are going to affect you at this point. I want to discuss one other thing here while we're in here, and then I'm going to open it up for questions. In this general description here, there is a South Carolina Code of Law in the real estate code that says that you do not, theoretically, paraphrasing, if this is not filled out, you do not have a legitimate buyer's agency agreement. That the buyer's agency agreement has to describe a general description of the property being sought. In general, could be just single family residence. But if it's blank, according to real estate law, you do not have a legitimate buyer's agency agreement. So we got to have a price on there too. I would absolutely fill out general location, but that's not mentioned in the South Carolina Code of Law of general location. But I would go that step beyond and say general location, whether it be Malden or Taylor's or a specific subdivision, but it's saying general. So, but specifically, general description and approximate price range is what makes it a legitimate buyer's agency agreement. Pull up the listing agreement, because we're going to spend more time on the agreement to buy and sell more than anything. I'm just wanting to knock out the buyer's agency agreement and the listing agreement real quick. Not a whole lot of changes here. But as you can see, they've changed a lot where things are at. Okay, so they've kind of repositioned things because it got a little confusing. On that last listing agreement, you were telling exactly what you were going to pay a buyer's agent before you were actually getting paid. So you were saying 3% to a buyer's agent or transaction broker, and then right below that, you're saying, oh, and now, oh, by the way, we're going to charge the seller 6 or 7% or whatever or 10% for land or whatever the case may be. So it just got a little discombobulated there. So they've taken that out now, and nothing has changed up here. So we're going to put the price of the house here, or a flat fee right here. I think that's going to be notice that's kind of strange there, but it's either the amount of, that's the amount of the house and the total fee, or if it's a flat fee, or the percentage right here, which is going to be either your 6 or 7% if it's a general listing. All right, so, and here's your, this is kind of strange where they move this, but I actually agree totally with this change. This is now our protection clause, okay? So if the property is sold within so many days of the expiration or termination, that's where you can actually go back and say, hey, while that was under my listing, that property showed to this particular buyer, that buyer went back, and now they canned me, and so you can actually go back for your commission if that was the case. So again, your protection clause is right there. And then now we get to the brokerage compensation to other agents. When you're filling this out, buyer's agency must be filled out and transaction brokerage. You cannot decide to not pay a transaction broker, meaning a agent that has a customer in the transaction. You do not have that authority. As a matter of fact, none of us have that authority because transaction brokerage or customer service is the default situation with, or the default criteria that every customer in South Carolina has. So we have to pay them. And as a matter of fact, it's in our policy that we will pay them. We're also not going to pay them less than what we're paying a buyer's agent. So if you have 3% buyer's agency, we're going to pay that transaction broker 3%. That's just our policy. That's what it's going to be. So want to let you know that. And mind you, remember that's TB in the MLS and SA for some of you newer agents out there. SA in MLS is not seller agency. That is actually sub agency, but we're going to try hopefully next month. This came up in the managers meeting to get SA removed from the Greenville MLS. So that way there'll be no more of that, somebody putting 3% in there thinking it's seller's agency.
AE.
Okay, all right. So this is one that some people use. Some people just put NA or 0. Let me give you a hypothetical. So you are listing a house and the seller lives in my favorite city, Cheese Grater, Wisconsin, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And the house is vacant and we're now in prime time. Well, we're coming up on winter and we know we're gonna have freezing temperatures. You as a real estate agent can actually set up with your seller to say, listen, I'll maintain your property since you're in Cheese Grater, Wisconsin, because I'm here and I'll take care of any sort of leaf removal, gutter cleaning, big time winterization. This is a big time one. If you have any listings that are coming up that are vacant throughout the winter, you really, really want to talk to your clients about getting them winterized, because I can tell you as a previous foreclosure agent, I've run into a whole lot of houses that have had a whole lot of plumbing problems when they weren't winterized. So that just gives you the opportunity to say, hey, up to $250, I'll take care of. I'll invoice you, but if it goes above that, then we need to readjust the listing agreement. But I'll take care of up to everything up to $250 here, and then I will just take care of that separately. Does that make sense?
And that's taken care of at the closing.
It can be taken care of at the closing, or you can take care of it throughout the time of the listing. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody else have any questions? All right, let me go over something too while we're in the listing agreement. Number 19, because I think a lot of us have missed this. I think we've talked about this maybe a couple times, but I did just want to bring to everybody's remembrance, because this will help you when it comes to your repair procedure and seller paid repairs, and what people are going to then have to negotiate. And it says, owner agrees to maintain the property, including the lawn, shrubbery, and grounds until the day of closing or possession, whichever occurs first. That's standard, right? We're going to do that. Owner also warrants, and here's where the owner is saying, all my heating and air conditioning, electrical and plumbing systems, built-in pertinent equipment or appliances. Remember, appliances are not part of the seller paid repairs, but they're telling you right here and there that all their appliances are working, shall be in operative condition on the day of closing or possession, whichever occurs first. Now watch this. Unless otherwise agreed herein, owner shall deliver the premises to the buyer with no broken panes. Okay? So they're talking about windows. They're talking about missing door screens or window screens with no missing or broken hardware, lighting, or plumbing fixtures. So when sellers are signing these things, they're saying that everything on this house is good to go. but yet we're also seeing that people are actually signing these things, and we do have broken windows. We do have appliances that are not working, and they know about it. So whenever you're going over this, please make sure you look at number 19 with maintenance and make sure that these people understand, hey, when you sign this, you're swearing that everything is in good working order. Does that make sense? Other than that, here we go on the very last page, photography. Now, this was one when I was down at the board, the executive committee and board of directors meeting for the state, and we were voting on all these changes. This number 27 really caused some controversy, and here's basically where the controversy came into effect. And let's read it because it's new. It's a seller irrevocably conveys any and all of the seller's audio, photography, and videography rights in perpetuity involving seller and seller's family and seller's property to broker for marketing and advertising and any other purpose deemed necessary by the broker. So the very first thing you go is, what the heck are they talking about, right? So here it is. When you hire a photographer to take pictures of the inside of somebody's house and other photos are in that picture, if there's a copyright on the picture that your photographer just took a picture of, theoretically, that could be considered a copyright violation, if you can imagine that. Now, let's go to number 28, because this is also new. Seller agrees to abide by any laws and regulations regulating audio and video surveillance of the property and persons entering the property, including agreeing not to use any surveillance in areas where persons have an expectation of privacy. By the way, it's against the law to have, even in your own house, okay, to have a video camera in a restroom. That is an expectation of privacy, even in somebody else's residence. That is federal guideline. Seller agrees that broker may or may not disclose potential surveillance as broker deems, including signage on the property and in advertising marketing. Okay, so you need to get the seller's permission to either disclose the potential of surveillance or not. Okay, and then so if you do have that permission, go ahead and put that in the member remarks. Hey, this house does have surveillance equipment. It has audio and video cameras, just so you know. Or if you don't have their permission, that buyer's agency agreement is also going to cover that. So they cover that with the buyer's side, and they cover it also the selling side. So do you see how that works? I do want to point to your attention that I'm not seeing that we have to initial the bottom of the listing agreement anymore. It looks like they've taken that out. It looks like we just have to have the one signature here. So that could save us some time and a lot of kickbacks. Let's get to the contract, because I know that's everybody's waiting on that. Very first thing that has been changed here. Let's notice that there's no more business day. Business days are gone. No more counting from 10 a.m. to 9:59. And we've already had discussion about that. So that's a big whoop, whoop, no more of that. Right at the front, right in the center, it says that buyer and sellers acknowledge the receipt of the disclosure of brokerage relationships. They either are a client or they're not, okay? And so they've taken out all those other things that we've seen on page 8. They've moved it to the front, and now buyer and seller has to initial, we got it, we're a client or we're a customer, right there. That's one of the reasons why I made such a big deal about the listing agreement paying transaction brokerage. You can't not pay transaction brokerage. It's our policy, we're going to do it. So it's right there on the agreement. Nothing has changed in here whatsoever. And let's get down to earnest money, because we are on a solid date now. It's no longer will be paid within so many business days, okay? It says, let's say if it's $1,000 right here is paid, let's say they give you the $1,000 with the offer, or the $1,000 is going to be paid by 6 p.m. on a hard and firm date. Now they've added this other statement right here. If earnest money is not delivered by the agreed upon date above, seller may terminate the contract by delivering notice of termination to the buyer. So buyer's agents, please be aware of that statement right there. Because this is now solid in writing and it's right here in black and white, it's always been that way. There was always a contingency within the contract of you needed to do something, and if you didn't perform, it was specific performance, the seller can terminate. But now, sellers are going to be watching that. I better know that earnest money has been delivered by 6 p.m. on that date, otherwise I can terminate. Okay? Sellers agents, you know, I want to let you know this too. If this is something that your seller wants to look at, especially if you've got another offer that's better than the one that your seller just accepted, you may want to watch that seller's that buyer's earnest money coming in, because if they don't meet that criteria right there and your seller wants to terminate and go with the other contract, it's pretty crystal clear. Any questions about that?
Hey, Matthew, just to clarify really quick.
Go ahead.
Sending a copy of the earnest check does not necessarily qualify as delivery, correct?
I would agree with you, Drew. It's not.
It has to be, to me, it has to be turned in to the attorney or whoever
or the escrow holder. That's exactly right. Yeah. Okay. So that's why it's so important when you give it to an attorney or you give it to the office, you may want to get something from the attorney to show that they are in receipt of it.
If we've got a hard date on here, I think it should probably start to just become a normal practice, normal part of procedure to have some sort of receipt on any earnest money turned in, just as CYA.
Yeah.
Because now there's a clear cut black and white when it's got to be in, when it's got to be received. So I think if we don't do that, we're setting ourselves up for an issue in the future.
I totally agree with you, Drew. Absolutely 100% agree with you.
This is Dina. I have a don't we have by law, doesn't the earnest money have to be turned in, what is it, 2 business days or 48 hours or whatever? So I'm confused as to why that's on there.
So that's a great question, Dina, and I'm actually glad that you brought it up. So basically, yes, in license law, our current real estate license code says that once a buyer and seller get a property under contract, they are ratified and executed in a contract, that earnest money is supposed to be in escrow within 48 hours of execution, okay? I have never heard of LLR coming down on any brokerage for having a contract that's outside of that.
And I assume on here, you know, the thing to consider as well, because before with it being based on when the contract was executed, this section needs to be something we watch as we go back and forth in negotiations too, because sometimes it can take a couple of days to get the contract ratified, and you may be already hitting the day the contract is actually agreed on being the day that you're supposed to drop the earnest money. So you got to watch this and keep up with changes in date on that too, where we didn't have to before.
That is a great point, Drew, one of which I didn't even think about, but you're absolutely right. This date is not going to be static. It's going to be dynamic, and it's going to be based upon when the contract becomes executed. So yeah, that's another thing that you're going to have to change or have initialed when it's scratched out and changed. So good point. Thank you for bringing that up. By the way, just want to remind everybody, when people initial contracts, the state law says you must have initials and date on the initials. And if it's signed the same, theoretically, if it's initialed 2 times in one day, not back to back, but if it was initialed and then it went back to the other party and then came back and it was initialed again, you got to have times on there as well. We typically don't see that nowadays, especially with DocuSign, but make sure you have that date and time stamp in there when you're changing something on a contract, because that is per license law. You must have at least a date when there's a change on a contract plus the initials. Going down to transaction cost. I haven't seen, I know this whole thing is in yellow, but I haven't seen any changes in here, in this transaction cost, this first one right here. But obviously here, we've had some changes. And this talks about the owners association and whether it's a buyer or sellers could transfer fees for an HOA. But look what it says. It says if no box is checked, these costs will be added to the seller's transaction cost. And remember, we talked about this in sales meeting a couple times where these boxes weren't checked. And all of a sudden, the day before closing, we find out that the HOA has a $450 transfer fee and nobody knew about it, including the selling agent. And who ended up paying for it? Yeah, you know, it came out of the agent's pocket because the buyer and seller said, we didn't agree to that. And so now if no box is checked, that is going on the seller side. So sellers agents, beware of that. You may, my personal preference is to check both, and somewhere in the contract, again, my personal preference, somewhere in the contract in section 28 or whatever, say transfer fees will be divided 50-50 between buyer and seller, or if it's an equal negotiation. All right. So what it looks like here is they're going to take out the percentage of closing costs, and it's never been my preference for a seller to pay up to a certain percent of closing costs. And I know why it was in there is because federal mandate says that a seller can pay up to 6% on an FHA buyer's loan. They can pay up to 3% on a conventional loan. I get that, but it seems to me like who's ever behind all these changes, and there was a committee for these changes, seemed to me like they kind of had the same thought I did about it's a lot easier for a seller to understand an actual dollar amount than a percentage. Because you guys know as well as I do, there are agents out there that probably most of them didn't do a seller's net sheet. And when they got to closing, they're like, I didn't agree to pay that much closing costs. My God, that's $5,000. Well, yeah, you did, Mr. Seller. It's right here at 3%. And this is that much of a property to make $5,000. And he's, I never would have agreed with that. So they did it. And so it's coming out. So make sure now it's a dollar amount. Any question on that? We have taken the minimum and maximum percentage out for loans. So buyer shall apply for financing by such and such date and shall deliver notice to seller of reasonable pre-final loan approval, lender pre-approval documentation, lender intermediate approval documentation. That's kind of like that letter going, hey, we've looked at it, we've underwritten it, and this loan is good to go if all these stipulations get met. That contain no unreasonable credit, income, or asset conditions within blank calendar days. And I'm still going to keep that. If you want to put 10 there, if you want to put 12 there, you know, I don't think it needs to be more than that, honestly. Unless there's just a serious issue and you know that the buyer's going to need to take a little bit to apply for financing, you may want to adjust that out a little bit more. But for the most part, a couple days after contract, make sure that financing is applied for, and within 10 to 12 days, we need to get that intermediate letter. And no repairs required prior to this notice. So the seller does not have to do anything, just so you know, before they get that. We've all known that. That hasn't changed. Final loan approval occurs when the lender funds. Look at that. It's not, hey, well, you've got to clear to close. It's when the lender funds the loan. That's the final loan approval, right? So if the buyer changes their lender during the financing period, it doesn't say may, it says they must notify the seller in writing within blank calendar days. No pass and go, no collecting $200. If you change your lender, you must notify the seller. Absent written approval by the seller, the buyer cannot change their lender if the closing date, here it is, if the closing date agreed upon in paragraph 4 will change as a direct result. Okay? So that is a biggie, biggie, biggie. Keep that in mind. If your buyer wants to change because they're going to get a better interest rate, that lender better meet that closing date. Otherwise, the seller does not have to agree to it whatsoever. And then it's got to be in writing as well. In writing means it better be on an addendum, just so you know. The automatic extension has been taken out of the contract. There is no more automatic extension of a contract. So now, if you don't meet that closing date, an addendum will need to be written, okay? All right, so we got our due diligence within the actual contract, so we don't need to have an extra addendum. We talked about this in sales meeting a couple times. I just want to bring it to everybody's remembrance. And reminder, check only one of the following options, which are below. If no boxes are checked, this contract will be an as-is contract. Do not make that mistake. Please double, triple check. Make sure that you check a box. Because if you're on the buying end and all of a sudden your buyer doesn't realize that they're in an as-is contract and they can't get out, whoo boy, I do not want to be on the end of that phone. If multiple boxes are checked, which to me that's a voidable contract, but they're saying if multiple boxes are checked, then the first paragraph of the checkbox will determine repairs. So if somebody checks repair procedure and checks due diligence, repair procedure is going to quote unquote trump due diligence. And now look at that, no more business days, all repair inspections and requests. Remember the previous contract, you had 2 business days after your entire inspection to get your repair request. Now, your inspections and your request shall be completed and delivered to the seller by 6 p.m. on that date, okay? Upon seller's request, the buyer will provide the seller the copy of the inspection report. So no more keeping the inspection report. If the seller requests it from the buyer is going to provide it. So we can't even negotiate if the buyer is going to sell it back. No later than 6 p.m., the seller shall deliver notice. So there's no more any more days after. You just got a hard date to deliver notice. And I love how they've come out and they've started talking about seller paid repairs. They've made it a little bit more understanding. Actually, they've made it a lot more easier to understand. So let's, again, seller paid repairs are the heating system, air conditioning, electrical, plumbing, water supply, water waste, making system, making them operable, make the roof free of leaks. There it is again, address environmental concerns and to make improvements structurally sound. And we know what sound means by the state. It can, if it's rotten wood, the state does not consider that structurally sound, even though you can live in the house. It's not going to cave in on you, but the word sound, they use the Merriam-Webster's dictionary understanding of that, which it's free of decay or defect. So seller paid repairs, right here in red. Seller paid repairs do not, and I love that, bold, capital, do not. There's no mistake in what a seller paid repair is. Do not include the following items. Home maintenance. Home maintenance. Here's an example. A filter. A HVAC filter. Right? So that's home maintenance item. Any flooring. Fogged windows. Look at this. Grandfathered code issues. Now, let me stop here and say this. You're right. It may not be a seller paid repair for that house that was built in 1970 to have a GFCI outlet by the water area within the bathroom or the kitchen. That's a grandfather code issue. You didn't have that back then. But if the lender requires it, then you're going to have to negotiate it. Either the buyer's going to have to take care of it, leave some money in escrow for it to be taken care of, or the seller's going to have to take care of it. You're going to have to negotiate that. But any grandfather code issues, that's not a seller paid repair. Landscaping is not a seller paid repair. Trim the trees back. It's not. Preventative maintenance, cosmetics. Okay. Just because they didn't like the way that the purple and orange paint came in, if you're a Clemson fan, that it doesn't include that. Or the, let me say the Gamecocks colors. Maybe somebody didn't want that. No cosmetics, no any home improvement and energy efficient items. So, that's going to cause some issues right there, the energy efficiency item, especially if it's part of the electrical system. So then you're going to be splitting hairs on that too. And then it continues on, no change here. If the seller contractually agrees to make all requested seller paid repairs, the parties agree to proceed under contract. The repairs to any other items are the sole responsibility of the buyer, okay? So no difference here. And again, the buyer still has, once they hear back from the seller, the buyer still has the 2 calendar days to choose to either accept what the seller has said that they're going to do, negotiate a new or amended contract with the seller for the payment of these, either in the repairs or the price of the house. So if the seller says, heck no, I'm not replacing that or fixing that, I don't know, plumbing problem within the guest bathroom, then you negotiate and say, okay, well, I'll do it myself. Just give me a $200 credit or take $200 off the price of the house. And that's how you do that, because most lenders are going to tell you that repair credits, money toward repairs, is not going to be something that can be on the closing disclosure. And or terminate the contract by delivered notice, but understand it's only if they say no to seller paid repairs. These, not these, okay? And anything else that the buyer wants. The repairs, any other items are the sole responsibility of the buyer. So any questions on that?
If you have a hard date for the buyer to submit a repair request, let's say it's a week or 7 days or whatever,
yep.
If you give that repair request early, 4 days early, 3 days early, 5 days early, there's still a hard date for the seller to respond. So technically, I guess we have to be preparing our buyers that technically the seller might have an extended period then to respond back. If you submit your repair request early. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, so I'm sitting here looking at that going, yeah, it does not change. The contract does not change when the seller is supposed to respond by. If they provide that early, the seller just maintains that date. You're right, it doesn't change that.
One thing too to keep in mind is that, and I'm sure a lot of us have done this already and been doing this, but I think this contract makes it even more clear that you really, 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 with your buyers, when you're going through this stuff, have to make sure that they really understand what they can and can walk away from this contract for.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of times that there's the misconception that or the opinion or the viewpoint from a buyer's perspective when they submit that repair request, that if they don't do this stuff, I'm walking. And a lot of times, most of the things that they're requesting are not things that they can walk away from without losing their earnest money. And so I think we've got to make sure that we're doing a really good job explaining that up front, even before the contract's even accepted or sent in.
Yeah, and I'm totally 100% in agreement with you on that. And clearly this has been an issue with agents explaining this to buyers, because they really, really tried to make a point here. If we can say that, they're trying to say, hey, this does not mean these things. This is what is being referred to as seller paid repairs. It doesn't include this, because we didn't have this before. Right? And so there was a lot of things that people were asking for, and people were just getting crazy and getting all mad and trying to walk away. And you're right, it caused a whole lot of problems. But with that still being said, I still think we're always going to have problems with repair procedure, just because of the structurally sound understanding and the way people feel about that, and the way the state says it, what somebody says is going to be structurally sound, another person's not. So we're always going to be splitting hairs on that. So due diligence is still the same. It's on and off site conditions. During the due diligence period, the buyer may take timely, prudent steps to help buyer inspectors, the seller estimators, and the realtors all have adequate time to coordinate inspections, repair requests, seller to obtain repair estimates, buyer and seller to negotiate repairs, and buyer to potentially timely and properly due diligence, terminate or buy. Let me talk about this too. Here's the hard date of it's got to be done by this date, meaning all the inspections, all of the going back and forth negotiation, all that has to be done in one date and time. If it is not, it goes to an as-is contract. Okay, just so you know. So you've got to be diligent on moving this data along. And you need to use that Form 525, okay, the purchase requested list of repairs of seller, you're supposed to respond by this time. I need this time for you to respond to these requests. So that expiration date in Form 525, the repair request, make sure that they understand that, because you've got one date in due diligence. Delivering a repair request does not extend the due diligence. So if your seller needs more time, use an addendum. Get this extended. So you make sure that your buyer doesn't go, or your seller doesn't go, and I mean, if you're on the selling side and going at as is, who cares, right? But if you're on the buying side, that's a bad thing. During the due diligence period, should buyer fail to obtain a new or amended contract with the seller, or a buyer fail to timely properly terminate, the buyer agrees to buy and the seller agrees to sell the property as is. I mean, we need to move the buyer and seller along. And I mean, mostly that buyer needs to move that seller along to get answers. And if the seller's not responding, that, you know, we either need to get an extension on the contract, because let's say most of the time, let's say 99% of the time, a seller is going to do everything they possibly can to get back the answers. Most of the time, let's be honest, most people out there are not trying to mess up a contract, okay? They do know that it's a legal and binding contract. They're not trying to just let something expire. But if a buyer needs to push that seller along, you need to do it with that repair addendum, make that expiration, and if they don't respond, they need to terminate that contract, because if not, it can automatically revert to an as-is property. Make sense?
I have issue with that. This is Dina. I don't see how that's beneficial to a buyer at all. I still don't see that.
And when you say beneficial, what do you mean by that?
I see it as a huge risk to a buyer, because if you can't get that negotiated within that time frame, it automatically moves to that as is, and they can be locked in. And
unless you terminate, that's right.
So I see that as a big risk and a big deterrent on using due diligence.
Well, I mean, I understand your position and opinion on that. I can say this: out of the thousands of contracts that I have approved and looked at and even had issues with, I've never once had that come up. Now, I do know that there's one agent in Greer, when that first started happening, that there was an issue with the seller not doing that. I understand that. But I myself have not ever had a buyer and seller have an issue with a seller getting back, or a buyer or seller saying no to extension, or a buyer saying no for the seller trying to get estimates or whatever. It's just never happened.
Okay.
So I think it's so few and far between. I mean, I don't know if I would use the word huge risk. I think it's a minimal risk, but I wouldn't say it's a huge risk, just based upon the way that everything runs with buyer and seller, and just my, I don't know, tenure with the contract.
I have another question. Is that the way it currently is right now? If we were in a due diligence contract and it's not negotiated out within that time frame, it moves to an as-is sale. Is that the way it is right now?
Yes, ma'am, it is.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Good questions, though. As is, now the actual as is contract. We already know what as is. No repairs, nothing, okay? The property is being sold as is. Seller's not going to do nothing. The buyer understands the seller's not going to do nothing. But this is a very, very, very specific paragraph here. We talked about it a little bit in sales meeting. All parties agree that property is being sold as is, which means the buyer buys a property for the purchase price, while seller maintains a property from the effective date through the closing, subject to normal wear and tear. Okay? Buyer retains the right to inspect the property they can inspect the property by 6 p.m. on such and such date for informational purposes only. The seller is under no obligation to remedy any issues the buyer discovers during their inspections. And look at this, the buyer may not terminate the contract based upon the results of the inspections conducted. Okay? You talking about a huge risk. I would say this right here, to use your word, Dina, this would be a huge risk to me. Unless, if you, let's go back to 2008. And when I was listing properties, I would have all of my listings pre-inspected by a well-known home inspector. Matter of fact, most of you know him, Adrian Smith, Advantage Home Inspection. I would make that inspection available and known to any sellers. It was on MLS. The buyer knew exactly what they were getting in a house. And if the buyer was okay with it, I would be okay with an as-is contract on something like that, personally, okay? Now, some of you would argue and say, well, what if that home inspector is wrong? You're right. What if they are? You're right. But for the most part, you don't have that kind of issue, okay? But when it comes to somebody putting an offer on a house in as-is, and they can inspect it after your contract, but they don't have any right to get out, if you want to do that, you might as well go to due diligence. Or again, due diligence, because you know they're not going to do anything, and you're just given the right to have it inspected and be able to get out whenever you need to. Number 9, we're not going to be too much longer. Number 9, we've added this. Seller will grant the buyer the right to perform a final walkthrough inspection of the property within 48 hours prior to the closing date. Not sure about how you guys work. I know most of you have your walkthroughs the night before, the morning of, or whatever the case may be, but this is saying 48 hours. Yeah, you guys are going to have to talk with the seller's agents and find out if the seller's even out of the house within 48 hours of it. Nothing has really changed here. Nothing sticking out. Home warranty. Remember, now in the contract that we have now, in the back portion of the contract, I think it's like section 26 or 27, whatever the case may be, it was talking about that you may receive compensation from a home inspection company, a home warranty company that's bought or sold during that goes to the buyer at the closing. Well, I can tell you, C Joyner doesn't do that. We do not accept, we call this a kickback, and you know, there's arguments on both sides whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. I can tell you it's the Department of Justice of the U.S. government does not like kickbacks. So we just don't do it. Once again, we stay away. Whatever you can do to keep the IRS and the government off your back, we do. But it's now in here in not bolded, but capital letters. Again, this home warranty stays the same, nothing different here. But notice, this is to give you notice that brokers may receive compensation from home warranty companies. You're not required to purchase a home warranty or similar residential service contract. And if you choose to purchase such coverage, you are free to purchase it from another provider. So basically, they're letting people know, hey, just because my agent said go with XYZ home warranty company, you don't have to go there. You can do whatever you want. And it says you're not required to purchase. So you're going to have some sellers saying, wait a minute, it says I'm not required. Okay. And you're right. The sellers aren't required. If the buyer wants them to, it's just, again, it's called negotiation, right? Let's see. All notice, consents, approvals, counterparts, and similar actions required under contract must be in paper or electronic writing and will only be effective as of delivery to the notice address, email, fax, written below, and awareness of the receipt by the broker. Will only be effective. So they're making it clear. Just because you tell me on the phone, yeah, we offered $200,000, my seller's coming back at $210,000, and the seller's agent calls the buyer's agent gets back to the seller's agent and says, yes, my buyer will accept $210,000. That has nothing to do with anything. It's got to be in writing. If another offer comes in and they can accept it, there is no such thing as that being, you can't do anything with that verbal conversation. We've always known that. They're just making it in writing now. The next big thing is the expiration of the offer. This offer will expire automatically if no action is taken by either party 30 calendar days after the offer's submittal. So if we leave that open expiration, especially in backup offers, just be aware that that offer automatically expires if there's no expiration in there. One of the greatest things in this contract now, they've removed a lot of that now. Check it out. The buyer's agent and the company, your license number, and your LLR office code. Does everybody know your LLR office code?
No.
All right. If you can, if you have your real estate license or your pocket card, it will say REO number OFC. That stands for real estate office number. And then all you got to do is put your email address. Look, not even a regular address, no nothing. They don't even care what affiliation you're with or what association you're with. They don't care.